Hey, thank you so much, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I see we still have people joining, but I think we have a good enough number to proceed. Thank you so much, Lerato, and thank you, Dr. Wing, and welcome, everybody. It's a beautiful afternoon where I'm sitting. There's a bit of sun outside. I hope it's the same for every one of you. Thank you for making time. I know it's a busy day, it's a working day, but this is really important. And I'm sure you'll be thanking yourself once this event is over. So I'm just going to jump right into it and introduce our speaker. We're very privileged today to have Dr. Craig Wing, who's a Wits alumni. He has so many achievements, but chief achievement of his is that he graduated from Wits, which, as you know, this week was announced to be the top university in Africa. So well done to all of you for having degrees from Africa's #1 university. We shall not mention the others. But it really is a pleasure to be here. We have the chat, so you can engage on the chat. You can let us know where you're joining from. You can let us know which class you graduated from. Gary, we see you. Welcome. You can also put your questions in there, and we'll engage as we go. But today really is about just fueling our curiosity on things to do with the future, things to do with technology, things to do with tech. Because the world really is moving at a very, very fast pace. Things are changing, and it's not just amazing how that things are changing, but how fast they're changing. And I'll give you guys an example. Yesterday, I went to the police station to get a document stamped. And when I was there, the police officer was assisting another gentleman. And he turned to me and he asked me, "Can you speak French?" And I said, "No, I can't speak French." But I was wondering why he was asking me this. Turns out the gentleman had a document that was in French that he needed the police to witness, but the police officer was not willing to sign this document because he didn't know what it said. So I said, "No, I don't speak French, but I can ChatGPT. Do you mind if I take a picture?" So I took a picture of the document and I just told ChatGPT, "Please translate." It spit out the entire document and I passed my phone to the policeman. He read it and he said, "Okay, this is fairly simple." Then he signed it. And I thought, wow, this is quite amazing. I mean, I don't know French. Do I really need to learn French now? Or can I just get by with ChatGPT? But this is the pace at which the world is changing. And this is why conversations like this are so important, because it helps us to get ourselves ready for what is coming. And we're very privileged to have the best of the best. Craig has a very long bio. I'm just going to read a portion of it. I'm going to summarize it because it'll take a good half an hour. But he's a globally recognized futurist, keynote speaker, and an entrepreneur based in South Africa. He holds a PhD in future strategy and is well known for developing the Future Fitness Core, an assessment tools that helps organizations navigate artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution. And he has so many career achievements. To name just a few, he has delivered over 500 keynotes across 50 plus countries. He advises global institutions such as the UN and Google. He's an entrepreneur. He's founded several ventures. He's worked at Google. He holds degrees in electrical engineering, an MSc and an MBA, and he is also a Desmond Tutu Fellow. So we're really privileged to have you today, Dr. Wing, and we look forward to having to sharing in whatever it is that you're going to tell us today. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over. If you have any questions, please keep them coming in the chat. If you have any comments, and we will summarize as we go. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Wing.
Thanks, Dr. Keegan. I appreciate the fact that I'm able to share and that you've joined me today, colleagues. I really appreciate it. I know that there's a small window that I have between Roland Garros and the World Cup, which is started next week. So I thought, let's take this time out and let's make sure that we can jump in here and I can share some thoughts with you. And I've entitled this presentation, How to Lead the Future, which is very provocative. But exactly as Dr. Keegan mentioned, if ever there was a time to think differently about the future, it's now. Just this afternoon, this morning, our dear friend in the United States has decided to bring back tariffs. We know what's going on in the Middle East. This morning also I woke up to the news that Anthropic is probably going to be listing at just under $1 trillion valuation. And so the list goes on around how quickly the world is changing. And so this work is really about saying, how do we think about the future differently? Now, to give us some grounding, as mentioned, my PhD is from the university down the road, which shall not be mentioned, but I am a Witsy originally, and my original undergrad was electrical engineering, and then my master's as well. I then went to the US where I did my MBA. But coming back to the PhD, it was really about trying to answer the fundamental question, which is how do we think about the future versus the what of the future? Now, this is a critical distinction because there's a lot of speakers, there's a lot of people out there who will claim to say they can tell you what the future is, but that's nothing more than speculation. There's no one that really can do that. And this was really important to me because for the first part of my my later career, I had done this for about 9 years, really saying what does the future look like, and it was very much the what of the future. And what I became very disgruntled with the work of saying this is what the future is going to be, but no one really truly knows. Because even though right now it's AI, before that there was there was things like digitization, there was stuff around NFTs, there was stuff around 3D printing, there was stuff around the metaverse, and think how Facebook changed the name to Meta and so on and so forth. And the point I'm trying to make there is, in as much as we thought the future was going to be A, B, C, D, it ends up being something else. And so I went back to my academics and I said, well, how do we do this better? How do I understand the how of the future versus the what of the future? And that underlying work then became the process that led to the PhD, but also this book, as per the left-hand side, and what I'm going to be speaking to you about today. But I thought the place to start was actually around understanding this incredible phrase by a chap called Alvin Toffler. And I know many of you on the talk will know who he is. He's a futurist himself, but he wrote a book in the 1960s called Future Shock. And in this book called Future Shock, he says that future shock itself is the term, the definition in terms of how do you feel about the future when it undergoes a huge amount of change, whether it's societal, whether it's political, whether it's technological. And he said this such a long time ago, but it's still so applicable today. And he said that feeling that you have, terrified, excited, nervous, that's called future shock. But in this book itself, he then goes a step further and says the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And this is so important for us as alumni of, as Dr. Keegan mentioned, the top university in Africa, because essentially what it's done is we've developed the ability to learn, and there's no questions about that. The question that I have is moving forward from here, when I've worked with executives, leaders, presidents, and so on and so forth, is it's very likely that your ability to succeed in the future doesn't depend on what you know, but your ability to unlearn those processes and relearn them. Now, this has become a trite statement, and a lot of people are talking about this, but it's still so fundamental. But to warm us up, I thought perhaps let's play a video around understanding this concept around something very simple like riding a bicycle.
He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this.
Can I ride a normal bike now? I mean, I've spent all this time unlearning how to ride a bike. If I go back and try to ride a normal one, will my brain mess up?
I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I proved is that I can only redesignate that bias.
But I'm actually 2 levels deep into this because I've learned and unlearned.
So I learned 3 things from this experiment. I learned that welders are often smarter than engineers. I learned that knowledge does not equal understanding. And I learned that truth is truth, no matter what I think about it. So be very careful how you interpret things, because you're looking at the world with a bias, whether you think you are or not.
So a really good video to start us off around how do we think about the future and how do we lead in the future. And this video is full of lessons, but there's 2 primary ones that I'd like you to consider and take away. The first is that knowledge does not equal understanding. And this is provocative, but it's very true. Think back to your degrees. Think back to anything that you studied at Wits, the stuff that you that you learned, how much of that do you actually understand and then apply? Knowledge does not equate to understanding. We know the world is changing. We know there's going to be an impact of artificial intelligence. We may not know in terms of job impacts yet, but do we really understand what it means to be enabled by AI, like Dr. King mentioned? We know that there's a war going on in the Middle East, and we know there's supply shortages, but do we understand what that means, not just today and not just for next week, but maybe for 3 months, maybe for 6 months, maybe for the next 5 years? And so knowledge does not equal understanding is a key variable to say, when you think about the future, just because you understand something doesn't mean, just because you have knowledge of something doesn't mean you understand it. So that's the key piece. The second piece that's so important is the question around biases that's raised in this video. Now, we all have biases, and it's actually a biological imperative. So when you're born and you're a child and you're a baby, you start creating synapses between the neurons in your brains. And the more you do certain things, the stronger those synapses become, and as a result of which you default to those. As a result of which, if you do a biopsy of a 2-year-old child, what you'll see is the brain size is approximately half the size of a fully grown adult, but they have more than double the neural connections. And that's because the neural plasticity is such that they're learning all the time. And the problem is over time, as adults, as those that have finished studying and carrying on, your learning rate decreases over time. You stop having those neural connections and you stop trying to say, how do I think about the world differently? And you default to certain patterns. And the point is the biases that we have are a normal response. It's not the biases that are a problem, but it's really the inability to recognize that we have those biases which impede us in terms of saying how we think about the future. So that's really important, but there's other pieces that are so much more important as well that tie into that. The first is by a lady called Annie Duke, and she's written a great book called Thinking in Bits. And Annie is really interesting because Annie is a behavioral psychologist. And she says, well, how do I take the stuff that I've learned around behavior and from a neuroscience point of view, and she applies it to lessons in Vegas? Because she wants to understand, why do certain people bet in certain ways? So if you play Texas Hold'em, for argument's sake, when there's the flop, there's the river, and so on and so forth, why do you believe your luck is going to change? Why do you hold on to a hand that's terrible? If you play the slots, why do you believe that your chances are going to win? And what she realized is something very interesting. She realized, and she says this in the book, she says, the smarter you are, the better you are at constructing a narrative that supports your beliefs, rationalizing and framing the data to fit your argument or point of view. Basically, the smarter you are, the more likely you are to say that I know what this means, or I know the answer to this based off prior research, prior understanding, prior success. And again, a lot of us have gone through the system where we've been successful, and therefore we default to that prior success as a means to say, I really know the answer to this. So this limiting belief then becomes one around where success holds us back. But it's not just that. It's not just that the smart you are more likely you are to believe your own biases, but it's also found in this research paper that I found in 2012, where the researchers found something called a blind spot bias. And a blind spot bias is very interesting because the blind spot bias essentially says that people will recognize the bias in everyone else, but they won't see it in themselves. And that becomes fundamentally problematic because you now start to see the issues around your team, your executive team, your management team, maybe in your household. And you can start saying, well, these people have these issues, but you can't recognize the challenges about yourself. And then again, as per the previous one around Annie Duke, this blind spot bias is associated with a higher cognitive ability. What does this mean? What do these two pieces of research show us? Basically, the smarter you are, the more likely you are to have biases. And this is the issue, I believe, which hinders us in terms of saying, how do we think about the future and planning for it better? So I then went off and did my PhD. And for that, I had a look at a number of key models and key frameworks. The first was Johari's window, which some of you may know, around understanding yourself because of how you view yourself and how others view you. And then there's the hidden, there's the blind, there's the open, and the unknown quadrant. But also there's the piece that was really important around Donald Rumsfeld and his unknown unknowns. But the piece that really brought this together was when I was traveling through Japan at the end of 2023, I came across this incredible saying. But Japan, for a second, just pause for a second, Japan is an incredible place because Japan was cut off for about 200 years. And they cut themselves off from the rest of the world because they didn't want the impact of Christianity. And as a result of which, you have this country which developed by itself. And as they develop, they have words that describe things that we don't necessarily have in English. Words like wabi-sabi, words like ikigai, words like mono-no-uwe. My favorite Japanese word is the word kuchisaibichi. And kuchisaibichi basically means I'm not hungry, my mouth is just lonely. A very important word and a very important phrase to use and to remember when you go to conferences when you do nothing else but you carry on eating. But the one that's most applicable for this presentation was this concept around shiki sanzui zu, which broadly speaking, translates to four-season landscape. Now, why did I bring this in? Well, the aristocratic in Japan take their garden and segment into four different quadrants: summer, autumn, winter, spring, and the plant foliage and plants specific for that season. So in summer, there's chrysanthemum. In spring, there's cherry blossom. In winter, there's evergreens and so on and so forth. And I thought this is a beautiful analogy. Why? Because it shows the beautiful views and the ways we can think about the seasons of not just our life, but the seasons of business, the seasons of the future, where for the Japanese, in this context, they can see life and death. They can see the transient nature of things. They can see how something grows and something dies, and it's all a cycle. And everything is a season that we're in. And so I took that narrative and I said, well, let's use that. And that became the framework for my book. But the framework that this hinges upon is the one I'm going to show you right now. I'll explain this to you in a very simple way. On the left-hand side, we've got system control. So what this really means is any organization, any company that works in an industry that has built-in handbrakes is on the left-hand side of the axis. So let's take mining, for example. Mining, by and large, traditional mining is a very old legacy industry, and so it takes a long time to do stuff. You have to find the land, you have to prospect it, you have to sample it. Once you've done the sampling, then you have to negotiate land contracts, and it takes many, many years. It takes years, it takes multiples of years, it takes decades, it takes multiple decades. So it's a very slow-moving industry because things move because the handbrakes are built into that system itself, and so there's a high degree of system control. The other end of the spectrum, it's emergent. So this is the proverbial, we'll build the plane as we fly it. On this side of the axis would be the world of artificial intelligence, around fintech, around medtech. It's a world around bioengineering. It's a world of quantum computers, around space travel, and who knows whatever else that's emergent. And as a result in which the policies, regulations, and compliance aren't even there, never mind the skills to actually grow this industry. So that's the spectrum on the x-axis. We can then be proactive on the top and reactive. On the left-hand side, you need analytical foundational skills, the stuff that you get taught through traditional degrees, it's experience. And on the right-hand side, it's about sensing, it's about imagination, it's about conversations, about groupthink, and it's about surfacing latent things which may not be visibly aware and visible to everyone at the same time. And so we start on our first season over here, which is the top left-hand quadrant, which is summer. And summer is a very interesting season because summer in this connotation is one where we have a lot of data. And not only do we have a lot of data, but data has a confidence rate of 90% plus. So we know what the variables are and we know how they will change. By and large, these are very slow-moving data points. It's things like population growth or GDP, where we can mostly plan around this. This is the world that a lot of organizations are in today. It's probably the world that of the 137 on this call right now, 120 of you operate within. It's a world where business as usual rules, and we can use the data to extrapolate a version of the past into the future. And because of the data, we can act with surety. It's a world of experience where we reward those that have done something and we say, based on that experience, we believe that you can use the same thing moving forward from here. So it's very much a future, a framing where you've got a lot of data and you can extrapolate. And for a lot of people, it's their favorite season because just like the future for companies, as individuals, you can use this data to plan. So in December, we know it's school holidays. We can plan for certain things. You can plan to go to the coast. You can book your hotels. You can book the airlines, and so on and so forth. And this planning is only possible because of the data that we have available. And for a lot of us, as mentioned before, it's our most favorite season, just like it is for Brian Adams. But the problem is this. The problem is, to what degree can we believe the data that we have in front of us? Because data is not very sure. So in this work that I do as a quote-unquote futurist, and I hate that term because it connotates I can tell the future, but in the work that I do, a lot of people say to me, Craig, what should my child study? What should my son or daughter study? Because of this world that we're in is so topsy-turvy. Now imagine we can go back. Imagine we can go back 65 years ago, and you would have asked me this question. I would say to you, well, look at the data. Very clearly, this chart shows us the number of jobs available for telephonists. So the people that would connect exchange A to connect to exchange B. And the data shows us that the number of telephonists doing this job is growing at an incredible rate. And you would say, this is a great job that you must be in. The problem is that data does not tell the full story. And so the problem is when our data either changes dramatically or the data is not very sure. The same thing runs true in the world of AI, where AI is very good around understanding what we have because it's codified, it's been trained. The underlying data set is around known data. It's around things that we already know, not around things which are emergent. And the point is, data is not always a proxy for the truth in terms of where we're going. But you still can do some amazing things around the summer future, around knowing what the data shows us. And I'm going to default to a video I'm going to show you right now about Bezos, because Bezos speaks about this provocatively. He speaks about how do you create businesses in a world that doesn't change, and as a result of which, how did he create Amazon?
I very frequently get the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And that is an interesting question. It's a very common one. I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And I submit to you that that second question is actually the more important of the two, because you can build a business strategy around the things that are stable in time. And so, as you pointed out, in our retail business, we know that customers want low prices. And I know that's going to be true 10 years from now. They want fast delivery. They want vast selection. And so the effort that we put into those things, spinning those things up, we know the energy we put into it today will still be paying dividends for our customers 10 years from now. And so those, when you have something that you know is true, even over the long term, you can afford to put a lot of energy into it. The big ideas in business are often very obvious, but it's very hard to maintain a firm grasp of the obvious at all times. But if you can do that and continue to spin up those flywheels and put energy into those things, as we're doing with AWS, over time, you build a better and better service for your customers on the things that genuinely matter to them.
Okay. So a really powerful video and a very interesting insight from Bezos, where he says, he's built Amazon around the premise that people want to buy things, selection, they want price, and they want quick delivery. And so everything has gone into that. So within Summer, we can say, well, how do we think about things that the customer will want? What do we believe the market wants that will never change over time, and build things around that? Right? And the same thing holds true in terms of understanding what are the dynamics of the future. What are those things that are never going to change moving into the future? And therefore, how do we think about that? The problem is exactly as articulated by the great philosopher Mike Tyson, says everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So you can plan for certain things, you can have all the data, you can think that you know what's going to happen, but unfortunately, the data is going to change, and unfortunately, the world is going to change. And so that shifts us out of summer into the next season. So diametrically opposite to summer is we have winter. Winter then is the world of emergent, and where by and large people are reactive towards what this means. And winter is one where we have no data, we have no precedence, we experience counts for naught, where we don't have a playbook, where we don't have some kind of viable option, where there is no methodology. And as a result of which you're really left in a greenfields area. It's in a place where there is no space to do anything because we don't know what the playbook is all about. But I also named this winter because I'm also a bit of a sci-fi geek, and part of the things that I really enjoy is watching, movies and series. And so I named it winter also because of Game of Thrones. And some of you maybe online will know this really well, Game of Thrones. And the big saying from that is, of course, that winter is coming. Now, why is this important? And for those of you who don't know about Game of Thrones, let me elaborate this for you also. So Game of Thrones is set in a mythical kingdom of Westeros. And in Westeros, the king has just been assassinated, just been killed. And you have all these royal families that are now fighting with each other. We're trying to work out who's going to take ownership and rule this country. It's probably going to be what it's going to be. It's probably going to be a view of how South Africa is going to be during the local elections in November. But the point is, all these families are fighting with each other, trying to work out who's going to rule. But the real problem is in the north of the country, there's a wall that was built 10,000 years ago. And no one knows who built them. All they know is legend says that beyond the wall, there's these things called White Walkers. White Walkers are basically zombies. And the point here is in winter, we're so busy trying to fight with each other that the real danger is one that we haven't even been able to articulate. It's, as they say in academic literature, it's the unthought. It's the things where we have no words for, there's no verbiage. But in Game of Thrones, there's another piece which is so important, so pertinent. That's because there's a protagonist called Jon Snow. And Jon Snow is based at the wall, and those that are on the wall are the Knights of the Dark Knights of the Wall. And basically what they do is they guard the wall to make sure that none of the White Walkers and all those other things come over the wall. But the wall is trained around military. It's a world around order, precedence, around command and control. It's around process. It's around symbolism. It's around all those different things. And John crosses the wall and he goes into this winter world. He goes from summer, which is the one side of the world, and he goes into winter. And there he meets a wilding, one of the crazy people that live on the other side of the world. And her name is Ygritte. She says to him, Jon Snow, you know nothing. And why is it important in this context? because John comes from a world of summer. He comes from process, he comes from order. He comes from a world of management teams, of exco and steerco, of innovation mandates. It comes around budget and sign-off and POs. And he crosses over and he says, well, how do I do things here? And he says you can't use those same processes in winter. And that's the problem we have today from a business lens. You should try to create businesses and processes and things in a winter world, one that's rapidly changing, without data based off a model of summer, and that is problematic. But this is also articulated very well by a guy called Frank Knight, an economist, and he says the problem is basically in winter, there's the difference between the unknown and risk. And what we've conflated is we've said that we can calculate the unknown, but we can't do that. We can calculate risk. And the problem, he says, is when we attribute to this, we start having real issues. This is what Prof. Ricardo Caballero of MIT says. When investors realize their assumptions about risk are no longer valid and conditional of night and uncertainty apply, markets witness destructive flights to quality in which participants rid portfolios of everything but the safest of investments such as US Treasury bonds. And we see the same thing happening right now. This crazy world we're in right now in the Middle East, we can see this flight away from risk towards things that are safe havens, because we can understand the difference between risk and uncertainty, between risk and the unknown. But it's also around saying, in this world of winter, if you don't have data, how else can you do things? Well, it's about being entrepreneurial. It's about saying, how do we develop a new kind of entrepreneurial mindset? My MBA was from Babson College, and one of the things that they speak about there is entrepreneurial thought and action. But it's also about understanding the customer. It's about design thinking. It's about lean. But more importantly, it's about reducing the time for you to respond to some kind of market change. It's about saying, how do I move from an agile kind of way, and how do I ensure that as the market conditions change, I can then change my response rate to be shorter, not longer. It then means pragmatically for an organization, for argument's sake, is not to tie yourself into multi-year contracts. From an individual point of view, it's about saying, how do I have liquidity, in terms of capital? How do I not get into long-term investments? Because in a world of uncertainty, you need the agility to move very quickly. So that's a quick note around winter, where there is no data. So summer, we know business as usual. Winter, there is no data. What we know in winter is there's going to be some kind of change, but we don't know what that change is going to be. Autumn then is when the change starts to reveal itself, and a result of which we can start to articulate what do we do about this. And autumn is, as the autumn or fall leaves start coming, we see these changes. We say, what do we do about artificial intelligence? What do we do about global geopolitics? What do we do about this monster El Nino that might be coming? How do we think about these things? So the change is now apparent. What do we do about that? And before I carry on over here again, let me just pause here and say, please do throw your questions into the chat window. We'll be taking some questions after the session. So please do throw questions there, and I'm happy to answer them as we go along at the end. So that's autumn. Autumn is also the domain of white swans and black swans. So it's those things, as Nassim Taleb says, are the low probability, high impact events, the black swans that then become right, that in retrospect everyone sees, but also the white swans, the ones that we see, we ignore over time. The point is, this season, autumn, is all about these big changes. Sometimes they're also called mega trends, and there's a difference between a trend and a signal, which I'll talk about shortly, but it's where the change starts to emerge, and we need to decide what do we do about them. So let me give another example around some of these changes as a result of which, when you put them together, what does this look like? So I spoke about Amazon before, so let me carry on speaking about them. Amazon in 2013 applied for something called anticipatory shipping. You can see this over here. So December 2013, anticipatory shipping. Now, why is this important? Amazon has the data around what you buy with a certain kind of cadence. How often do you buy that certain thing? And because they know that you buy that certain thing with some kind of cadence, they can then send to the distribution center near you, which is why they're able to ship it within such a short period of time. But in 2013, this anticipatory shipping patent was really interesting, because essentially what they're saying is, they were saying, how do we then have rights where they can ship you the thing before you order the thing? And that becomes very important, again, because the data that they have, right? The year afterwards, Amazon came up with this thing called the Amazon lock, which is very interesting. And the Amazon lock is essentially when an Amazon delivery agent can go to your premise and open up your house using their vetted credentials and put the parcel inside your house. So what does this mean? It means they can now send you the stuff before you order it, before you know they need it. It then gets delivered to your premises and then gets placed inside your house. When you take these things together, what does it mean? Theoretically, or at least fictionally, or at least probabilistically, it means a world without toilet paper. It means about understanding your usage patterns. Now, overlay this with a home listening device, overlay this with some kind of sensor economy, and what we have is we have a completely different game. We have the ability to say, well, when we combine these different changes, these different signals, these different things through the process of combinatorials, we can start to understand what the future might look like. And we can see how this might hold true. And let's use a finance example for argument's sake. You might be sitting with your spouse and saying, we need to save more for the family. We need to save for our child's education, for a holiday. We know this already. You say certain things, and what pops up on your screen is you spoke about a holiday destination, Mauritius, and the next thing you're being served with ads from Mauritius. But more explicitly, this device could then be listening and saying, we need to save more money at home. What it could do, it could contact your bank automatically, structure your portfolio, take out certain kinds of home loans, take out certain kind of loans, and restructure your entire portfolio. It could then be done for you automatically. And this is the point around autumn. It's about understanding those changes and how do we think about those. Now, this is a pretty trivial, a pretty trite example. Here's some other ones which are signals. And this is not about being correct. This is about saying, well, what are some of these things? What are these signals which are the little blips on the radar? Not a trend which is mainstream that everyone's doing, but a signal is something which a few people notice, but over time they develop into a trend. So be careful around folks that speak about trends as if it's the future. Trends are obvious. Signals are not. And these are weak signals, not strong signals. So this is very interesting because there was a thing called Maltbook that came out a while ago that's now been acquired subsequently. But Maltbook was essentially a Reddit for agents, for AI agents. For those of you who don't know what an agent is, think about a ChatGPT or a Gemini, Claude, but essentially it's an AI system that can do things independently. So you give it a task to do and it goes off and does its own thing. But essentially, Maltbook was a social media platform where these agents could come along and they could then ask each other questions around things that might be applicable to them. So it might be stuff like saying, well, how do we create payment rails? It might be stuff around saying, well, how do we document in a certain manner? And they let this thing run. And as it turns out, what's really interesting and scary at the same time too, is these agents create their own church. Now, again, this is not about being correct. It's not about being, about saying, well, Craig, this is a prediction about the future. It's about saying, when you look at the signals, when you look at autumn, what is it saying to us? It says to us definitively that we'll need a place where social media is no longer just for humans, but it may be a collective place around agents. If you don't believe that's true, I do a lot of work around the world, and one of the clients that I work with is Accenture. And Accenture has delegated this year is the year around orchestration. And orchestration is essentially what this was about. It's about orchestrating agents. From a pure business lens, think about if you come from a multi-corporate, multinational corporate. You've got a number of different regions. You've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got engineering. Without a doubt, those different departments, if you're big enough, are writing their own agents. What we need to do is understand that these agents need to work together. And so it's the orchestration, or in some degree, a sense of what this looks like here. And then there's this. It's called rentahuman.ai. And essentially, it's a platform where you as a human being, as a flesh bag, as it says really over here, or a meat layer, you can now rent your human body out to an AI, which can then use you to do certain tasks. And so you can say, I want to be rented out. I want to say, a machine can tell me what to do. And as a result of which you essentially give yourself the ability to be used by a machine. And again, it's stuff in the real world, in physical things, which obviously bridges the gap between what we see around Elon Musk and his robots. But forget that for a second. This is all about saying, well, how do we have a space where we have some kind of interaction with the physical world? Now, for some of you that are rolling your eyes or saying this sounds really, really dystopian, think about it for a second. If you work from home right now, or even if you just work in general, you get an email from your boss, from your manager, you're really getting tasks assigned to you from what you believe is a human being. It may not be. So again, these are signals to say, well, how do we think about these changes? How do we think about where the world is going? The problem you may say to me is, Craig, with all these changes coming abroad, how do we know which is the right one to choose? In my book, I researched something called Welgevonden. It's a game reserve in South Africa, a private game reserve. And Welgevonden, like all the other game reserves in South Africa and in Africa in large, are trying to deal with the problem around rhino poaching, where at its absolute peak, between 3 and 4 rhino being killed a day. And so Welgevonden said, well, how do we deal with this differently? Because we can't deal with the problem in the same way that we always have. This is what they did.
The rhino has become one of the key species that is becoming endangered due to poaching throughout Africa, but now especially in South Africa. Up until now, poachers have been increasing in numbers, and they become more militarized with weapons, and so of course we've had to do the same. This is not sustainable. The only way to do this better is to bring in technology and things that they do not have.
So the first thing people wonder is, why are you colouring animals that aren't rhino? The Wildlife Protection Program aims to protect rhino populations by using mega herbivores as a sentinel to detect poaching activity within a reserve. Your poacher enters an area, it's more likely to come across an impala than a rhino, and so these animals will then behave differently, and as soon as there's a change in their behaviour, we'll be able to detect where exactly a poacher is, when he entered, and where he's intending on going.
Okay. So really interesting. That was called Project Spark. It was actually a collaboration between IBM and NTN. And as that video articulates, they tag these as sentinel animals, the waterbuck, the wildebeest, the low-value game. And they understand the behavior, which is then determined by machine learning via the cloud. And as soon as an animal acts outside those bounds, what they found is they found that those animals react differently in the presence of a human predator, never mind an animal predator, and they can proactively deploy a range of those areas with something like an 86% success rate. And so the point here, and the point around the story, this little anecdote, is about saying, even if you don't know what the change is, how do you create those systems to identify what those changes are going to be? Now, I spoke about this before. So is this a precursor around something else? I had a conversation, I had a talk with Stanley Baker, and I said, and this was even before this started to happen, I said, well, here's the strait, and what does it mean? It means that theoretically the signal is we can start to privatize certain parts around geographical areas. And we know it's not this strait, it's other straits, which might be privatized, Strait of Malacca in Asia, for argument's sake, when you start taking control of that. But this is an indicator, and the indicator is what happens as a result of this. What's the sentinel here trying to say to us? Right? And we know, for argument's sake, over here, that in South Africa, we're a little bit better off. But we also know that when you look at it, we can see that there's other countries which probably have less ability to absorb these shocks. We can see that there's places like Asia, like Australia, like New Zealand. It's places where they'll run out of fuel before. And as a result of which, we can see what their behavior is and what does it mean for their economies. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these over here. Short to say that we can feel the impact, and this I pulled out a couple of days ago. It's around saying that even now, even though the petrol price went up yesterday, and I hope you filled up, it still looks like there's going to be another increase next year. So what are these different indicators showing us? What are these little sentinel animals showing us? Well, they're showing us a clear indicator that the world's becoming more constrained around resources, because the strait supplies a lot of oil, as we know, around the world. But it's not just the oil. It's around other pieces as well. We know about things like fertilizer. But did we know that also that through the Gulf of Hormuz, there's helium? Now, helium is used in the fabrication of electronic chips. So this could very well mean that there's a chip shortage. The problem is this, is when you start layering all these different things together, we know that there's a shortage, obviously, of oil or fertilizer. We know that because of the fertilizer, cost of fertilizer becoming more expensive, which means the northern hemisphere that should be planted now are not able to plant. We're okay in South Africa because we planted before the winter came through. That means there might be a food shortage in the northern hemisphere because of the costs of food, right? Add on El Nino, which is supposed to come towards the end of the year, and these signals start saying, think about these things. What does it mean? The end outcome, the end change might be that we need to start stocking up in our fridges and our freezers, okay? So it's really about saying, what is the system that we set up to identify what are those applicable changes? So those are the 3 seasons that I've spoken about right now. And as a quick recap, summer, business as usual, data, we can extrapolate, we know what's going to happen. Winter, we have no data, we don't know what's going to happen. It's all about being lean, entrepreneurial, moving very quickly. What we know is there's going to be some kind of change. We don't know what the change is going to be. Autumn, the change starts to manifest. We start to say, well, how do we think about these changes, be it trends or signals? And more importantly, because we don't know what the change is going to be per se, we may not know what the signal is. How do we set up a system as a pre-indicator for that thing? The final season that we then look at then is spring. And spring is a really interesting season because spring usually, in a sequential point of view, follows winter. And for a lot of us, when spring comes around, we start doing spring cleaning. We start cleaning our house. We start opening our cupboards. We try on clothes. We haven't tried them before. But the problem is the clothing has shrank by itself because we've forgotten to do certain things. We've forgotten to eat correctly. We've forgotten to exercise. And so spring is sometimes the season of the forgotten future. It's the stuff that we thought was important, but forgotten about it over time. This is the world of something called the black jellyfish. Now, black swans, white swans I spoke about before. What's a black jellyfish? Well, black jellyfish is something that's always been there, but over time it reaches a certain kind of critical point which we can no longer ignore anymore. So let me give an example and also of how they came up with the term black jellyfish. Because of climate change, the world is getting warmer. That's a scientific fact. We can see the temperatures are increasing, right? Because the temperatures are increasing globally, the oceans are also increasing. Because the oceans are getting warmer, there's more schools of black jellyfish. As a result of which, nuclear power plants that cool the reactor cores by sucking up ocean water are now sucking up jellyfish and are not breaking down. And so that's how the term black jellyfish has come about. Something that's always been there, but it's now reached its point. In Gauteng, if you listen to me in Johannesburg, in Gauteng, we've always known that infrastructure was an issue. We've known about water issues. We see now the problems of the roads. We see how Johannesburg is basically bankrupt. It's just reached a point where it's untenable. And so we have to think about what other black jellyfish are there that are in plain sight but increasing more of. The questions around otherism, questions around mental health, questions around climate change I spoke about before. These are really important. But to come back to what Dr. Keegan said, the problem is black jellyfish are not just negative and positive. It's also one of the things that hinder us, one of the things that we forgot. In our race to think about AI and artificial intelligence, we've also forgotten that the biggest dependencies of AI is electricity and communication, where Africa is behind everyone else. Right? So again, there's dependencies around this, which makes it so that the other mega things will not necessarily be realized. But the one that I want to focus on for the last 5-10 minutes is really the question around how we've gotten the importance of the human being. Now, we know this, and we've spoken about this plenty of times, and we've heard other speakers speak about this, and it's on the radio. And people say things like, in an age of AI, when technology rolls about, it's all about being more human, not less human. And that's a very trite comment because it's very easy to say those things. But what does the data show us? What does the research show us? I found this paper from MIT, and it's very interesting because at MIT, they found something called the epoch of AI. And the epoch of AI is essentially where these MIT researchers went back and said, how do we calculate essentially what's called an epoch score? And the epoch score, I believe, is augmentation of science, technology, engineering, and maths, and maybe arts as well, because it's the augmentation, not the replacement of STEM. What does epoch stand for? Empathy and emotional intelligence, presence, networking, human connection, judgment, and ethics, creativity, imagination, hope, vision, and leadership. And what these researchers basically said is said, these are the things which make us human. These are the things that the machines are not able to do with ease, or certainly they certainly don't understand what it means. Right? We have some kind of connotation. We have a belief that machines can understand, and they know. They don't. It's a statistical engine. The transformers behind it from tokenization don't understand. It's a statistical anomaly in terms of things that they're working out. Well, what these researchers then went back and they did something very interesting. They said, well, how do we find what's called an epoch score, which is essentially your ability to be human? And they found an almost perfect inverse correlation around your ability to be human and the ability for you to keep your job to the factor of negative 0.959. Okay. And what they found is top of the pops over there is management, business, and finance, i.e., these are the roles and these are the jobs that are most likely not to be replaced by AI if you have a human component. This is interesting because a couple of months ago, Anthropic came out with a paper. And in this paper, Anthropic said something different. Anthropic said, based on the research around Claude, their AI, their GPT, they said, when we have a look at the belief that they have around job replacement, they said jobs today are red and maximum limit of blue. And what they find is completely contradictory, at least it seems so, according to MIT. Their belief is management, business and finance, computer and math, architecture, engineering, are the ones that are most likely jobs to be replaced by artificial intelligence, which is completely opposite, directionally opposite to what MIT says. Why do we have this difference of opinion? Well, here's the answer. When you have a look at how Anthropic did this, Anthropic said, well, let's have a look at our use case. Let's try to understand where people are using Claude in terms of their work stream. So what is the role and what's the task, not what's the job? And this is when they started to bucket into the red thing. They then asked blue, was then researchers in that area what they believe would replace it. The point is this. There's a methodological flaw in Anthropic's work. They said, this is the kind of work the machine can do. Therefore, this is the number of jobs that we lose. So let me give an example. If 20% of the work of a baker can be done by a machine, doesn't mean 20% of bakers are going to lose their job. And that's the leap that Anthropic went to. These pieces of research are actually complementary. This basically says that the work of these jobs, and they can be automated to a certain degree, but your ability to succeed in these roles, the same roles, is being human. And so these pieces are not contradictory, they're complementary. AI will do the tasks of it, but you need to be more human in these roles. So that's the model that we have. It's around understanding where's the world going, how do we think about the lens through a multiple lens. And this is important because a lot of people make two primary mistakes. The first is the future is an extrapolation of the past, and the second one is there's a singular future. There's not. There's multiple futures. And a framework like this will help you think through these different things. That, folks, is a real trend. That's the very thin periphery between summer and autumn, when things are known, where everyone's doing it. That is a signal. Those are the weak dots, which may be indicators of something else coming through. Take a picture of this if you want to, because you can also do a little quiz, and this quiz will help you understand what kind of season person you are, because some of us gravitate more towards summer, some of us gravitate more towards springs, and so on and so forth. Now, why is it important? Well, in our teams, we will have certain people that think in a certain way. We might have folks who think about the world in an autumn way, i.e. they like change, they like following the newest stuff, they like to be enabled by AI, for argument's sake. At the same time, we might have people who are spring, people who like to reflect and try to say, well, let's pause for a second, let's try to remember and think about what we did historically. The problem is in the world today is we haven't got the right kind of language, we haven't got the right kind of diction. We say things like the future must be tech-enabled. Well, that's very much an autumn view. That may not be the view of the other seasons. So what we can now start to do is we can start to say, attribute this, and we can say, well, when we look at Q4 of this year, we're going to be facing a winter future, i.e. we don't know what's coming down the line. But when we reflect around where our products are, it's very much summer. We know what it is, the data shows us. So even diction, the language is important. I would encourage you to do this with your teams, because you can then also see the disparities around why there's sometimes conflict and why there's sometimes an inability to understand what we mean when we say, quote unquote, the future. Okay. But to finish off, that is, I'm sure, as many of you know, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It might be BANI, it might be any other descriptors. The point is the winter quadrant is the one that's growing bigger over time. It's becoming more winter, it's becoming more problematic, right? And by relation and by proportion, that then means that summer is becoming smaller. Now, I'm not saying summer is becoming irrelevant. I'm saying that there's more winter than there is summer. There's more around this world that's changing. We can feel this in the work that we do, in the lives we live, the way we raise our children, the way things are going, right? And so summer is becoming smaller as winter increases. But it's also the work around Daniel Kahneman. It's the work around system 1 versus system 2 thinking. System 1 is the stuff that you do on the road without even thinking twice. It's about when you drive in the streets of South Africa and you come to an orange robot and you don't brake, for those of you who are saying that you brake, you accelerate because you don't think about it, you do the thing automatically. System 2 thinking is about saying, how do you think about how you think? It's sometimes called metacognition. And what researchers are finding right now is metacognition is actually the highest abstraction of intelligence. It's about how do you think about how you think. So it's about saying, how would I normally think about the future? Now, let me pause and think about that. These futures below the x-axis, the springs and the winters are the ones that you have to think about how you think about the future that are so important. And the system 1, system 2 thinking is so powerful that it can fool us into thinking about the future in a way that we wouldn't believe. So here's a quick example. This, you might be able to recognize, it's very easy, it's obvious, it's a Coke can. But what you may not realize is even though it looks like that Coke can is red, it's actually not red. If you don't believe me, stick your nose all the way to your screen, and if you look very closely, what you'll see is that image alone, that picture, there is no red. That's the power of system 1 thinking. Your brain recognizes it as a Coke can and says Coke cans must be red, and therefore it fills in the gaps. There is no red in that photo. If you're too shy to put your face to and your nose to your screen, that's a blown up image, and that one's further away. And this is the point around system 1 thinking. It's very easy to let the future happen to you. It's very easy to let the summers and the autumns happen to you. But you have to engage system 2. You have to think deeply about the future. And as this is fundamentally a education institution, I do want to ask a provocative question. There's a lot of discourse around saying, how do we think about the history curriculum and what should the history of South Africa be? I just question provocatively, we teach so much about history. Why do we not teach about the future? Why is there not a subject called the future in schools, in universities? Why do we teach about where we came from as a country where we came from as a people, but we don't say, well, how do we plan better for the future? There's another saying over here, which I think is so powerful in this context around where we are as South Africans, as where we are as Witsis. And that is, most people are emotional about the past and logical about the future. And I'd say we need to reverse that. We need to be logical about the past and emotional about the future. We can't change the past. We must be logical about it. We can learn from that. And let's be emotional about the future. And so on that note, let me end with this quote from Richard Feynman. It says, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And so I started with an Alvin Toffler quote. Let me finish with this one. In dealing with the future, it's far more important to be manageable than to be right. So when we lead in the future, it's about asking questions. It's about not being the smartest person in the room. It's about understanding that the collective intelligence of all of us is important because it allows us to be imaginative, to think about the future around what it might be. And let's imagine what the future might have been if we had actually done this 10 years ago, if we had thought about the future 10 years ago. And because this is primarily a talk, I have to show you the obligatory Nando's video. And so I'll do that, and I'll end from there, and we'll take some questions.
2032. Elon, America's made you slow, ne? Too much tweeting, Elon. Mars, Zakala Gemach. In South Africa, we always make a plan. This Mzansi life has been preparing us for years. Angie, update me. The craters?
That's going great.
Kunjani. Oh, look at this. Hard fault, just like home. Stop. Space. Hey, guys.
Release!
Hola, no. Let's stop for Mars, Mama.
Dango. Load stage 6. You see, no power doesn't mean we're powerless.
So who gets to go to Mars?
Anybody, except the Futsekers.
So once again, proving that Nando's maybe does have the ability to tell the future. And with that, folks, thank you very much for letting me spend some time with you. There's my details. I'll leave that on screen. You can scan that QR code also if you still want to do the quiz. And let's potentially take some questions. If there are any questions, let me stop sharing over here. Dr. Keegan,
Hi,
if you're there.
Craig. We have a few questions in the chat. I'm just going through them quickly. From Haroon Mohammed, he says, thanks for a very informative session. I agree with the idea that knowledge is not equal to understanding. Is it meant that knowledge is awareness? Is it also meant by understanding application? And then he says, can the talk be also titled Continuities and Discontinuities? Probabilistic thinking is the way to go.
Let's do the second one because the second one is easiest. Yes, it's absolutely probabilistic. It's not deterministic. And I think that's the key piece, right? The future is yet written. We don't know what it's going to be. And how do we use this model to make better decisions? In terms of the question, knowledge is not equal to understanding. Yes, very much you could say knowledge is awareness. We can very much say knowledge is about information gathering. It's about doing the senses into the marketplace. It's about saying, well, how do I understand what's going on? But the understanding is in translating that not even just into actionable insights, but into saying, well, how do we apply this? So it's the application of the thing that we see is another way of thinking about it, right? And the application then is one that, and I think this is a big piece over here to add to the words you've had over there, Haroon. It's a question around value. So what's the value creation? What's the value attribution by understanding what does the world look like? And how do we create value in a future that's changing so rapidly, but the value needs to be constant and continuous over multiple futures or multiple time horizons. Okay?
Okay, from Samantha Marion, thank you for the wonderful session, Dr. Craig. What would be the most important questions we, individuals and organizations, should ask ourselves during each season to be able to leverage each uniquely?
That's a great question, Samantha. So I think the first one is the somewhat very easy, Bezos. What is not going to change? Okay, so what's not going to change? How do we do things? So the question I would ask is, are we prepared to make decisions without having all data. So can we make a decision? Are we comfortable with doing things beyond what we believe the surety is? Okay, so can we make decisions based around imperfect or no data? That's what I'll say for winter. For autumn, I would ask the question not about what's going to happen, but the question around what if. So what if these things start to happen? Not what if it happens, what if these things happen? And the last one, which is spring, what is the question I'll ask around spring? Is again, the provocative thing is, what is the thing that we've forgotten? And maybe the application there is rewind, if you can, 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years. And 50 years ago, 10 years ago, what did we think the future was going to be at that point in time? And just by the way, a cursory side note is we can use the same framework for us in our person as individuals. So summer, just because you're a graphic artist, a graphic designer, you may always think you're going to be a graphic designer, engineer. I always thought I was going to be an engineer, but the world changes. The winter then is about saying, well, I'm going to move somewhere. That would be autumn. I'm going to move somewhere else. I know there's going to be change. The question is, how do I create a system to help me deal with the change? How do I find expats? How do I find a South African community? Winter would be around the lines of saying, well, I'm going to have a kid. One of my loved person, my parents or my spouse is sick. There's going to be change, but you don't know what that's going to be. And then spring is then the stuff that you've forgotten about. What did you think you were going to be when you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when you came to Wits that first day when you sat by Great Hall steps? What is that thing that you thought? So the same framework can be applied in your person as it can for us as a company. Okay.
Lovely. From Grant Kruger. Hi, Craig. Great to see you again after so long. Your framework is fascinating. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom so generously. I was wondering how your framework sits alongside regular scenario planning methods.
Yeah, great question, Grant. I would say there's a parallel process. It doesn't replace. It doesn't say, well, this is in place of scenario planning. What I would do is I'd say I would use this as a lens. So often what happens is, because we can't really plan out winter, by definition, that's unfortunate. We don't know what's going through. That kind of disqualifies winter out of the equation, by and large, right? Summer scenarios are not really useful, as you know, because we've got the data. And so there's some kind of surety. Yes, you can do some kind of sensitivity analysis. I would use scenarios primarily around the autumn season and also around spring. And you could do a different set of scenarios around this. So it's not about excluding those. It's about saying, how do we build a lens into these things? I would then go a step further and say, when we have a look at scenario planning and the things that are informing us, so what are those levers? What are those data points? I would lean more towards the signals, i.e. the interface between autumn and winter, versus trends, which is the interface between autumn and summer, because that's the more well-known piece. So it doesn't replace, it augments. And it's just another frame to say, how do we think about this? Often when I do scenario work, we use things out of summer, so we know what's going to happen. There's financial tolerances. There's great kinds of questions around change of leadership. I think those are actually pretty easy. I think scenarios more around the signals versus the trends in autumn versus within summer and winter. Okay.
Thank you. And then again from Haroon, he wants you to say something about PUMO by Dr. Ulrich Lichtenhalter.
Haroon, you're going to have to chuck that in the chat window while we go to the next question. I'm not aware of PUMO. If you could just do that for me. Shall we go to the next question so long, Loretta?
Sure. Okay, somebody's saying a future in Mars is a close reality, but not accessible to all. Adrian Barrett says, thank you for your insight. If you could relate this back to Game of Thrones, what would you tell Jon Snow?
That's a funny question, Adrian. If you watch the series, I'm actually reading the books right now. It's a gigantic book set. If you watch the show and you read the books, what you eventually start to see is Jon organically starts shifting away from the Night's Watch. He automatically starts shifting away from saying, this is the way we should be doing things. Even though he learns about stuff in winter, he comes back over the, and what he starts doing is he starts to apply winter lessons within a summer context, not summer lessons in a winter context. So how are we more flexible? How do we do things differently? How do we act in a way that is perhaps not decorum and is not necessarily the way we've always done things? So your answer is a great one. I've never actually thought of it that way. I would say what he needs to do is he needs to say, well, what did you learn, what did you learn from the worldlings? What did you learn around understanding that it's all about each other versus about this thing against each other? which is a big thing in Game of Thrones. So that was a fun conversation. Thank you.
Lovely. And then just moving on to the next question. Thank you for a great presentation. Does planning and acting for multiple seasons or scenarios necessarily come with a cost premium versus only planning for one season? Is there a scenario where all 4 seasons come with less overhead? And that's from Irfan.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is nothing comes easily and nothing comes cheap, if that makes any sense, right? So absolutely there's a cost premium, but over here cost, obviously I'm going to delineate and not say cost from a monetary point of view, but say from a time perspective, definitively, right? Because this essentially forces us to think through multiple lenses through at least 4 different frames. The current framework, the current way most organizations think about the future, it's just extrapolation. It's an Excel spreadsheet, bottom right-hand corner, drag and drop, and that's what we do, right? That's how most organizations plan. And I see this around the world. I did it at Google as well. That's actually a very low-cost way of thinking about the future, but it's also very fragile. So in Talib's world, it's about saying, well, how do you create a more anti-fragile world? How do you then do it around all 4 seasons? There actually is a way of doing this. It's not an absolute science, but essentially another way of looking at this question that you've posed here, Irfan, is about saying, well, how do we allocate resources? So it's not about the cost, but about saying, if we have a fixed basket of goods, if you've got 100 points, where do we allocate those points? And so by direction, not absolute, I would say 60, 70% still has to go towards summer. It still has to be towards you do what you got to do today, because we still have to pay the bills. We still have to keep the lights on. In my research, I found something called the duality of leadership, which is essentially you've got to pay the bills today, because if you don't survive as a business today, there's no future that we can exist in. The inverse is also true. We can't just think about the future the whole time. We can't just think about today because there's no future. We can't just think about the future because we can't do this stuff today, right? And so I would say summer is actually about 60, 70%. A combination of spring and autumn would be about 20%, maybe 30%. And now you're going to say to me, Craig, that leaves nothing left over for winter. Winter is actually an ongoing permutation. It's actually a culture play. It's actually about saying, how do you build in flexibility into your organization to be entrepreneurial, to embed processes like design thinking, to say, how do we change the way we do things? So it's actually more around saying, how do we think about planning for winter as a mindset, as a process, as a culture? And it's actually interesting because once you can plan for that, the other 3 seasons become more manageable. So if you had to choose around, efficiency versus efficacy, I'd focus around changing the culture of our organization, but still paying the lights for summer.
Brilliant. And then Aaron is asking you to differentiate risk and the unknown. Sorry.
Yeah, so that comes from Frank Knight. He's an economist. It's called Knightian uncertainty. Basically, what he says is you can't calculate the unknown. That's a definitive. That by definition is an unknown. But economists tend to say, well, we can calculate the unknown by assigning some kind of risk premium to it. And that's a fundamental mistake. Right? So a prime example, again, is how do we measure the unknown outcomes and impact around what's going on in the Middle East? Well, the truth is we can't, because you can't measure the unknown. You can model risk behavior. You can model risks and algorithms around that, but you actually can't measure the unknown. You can measure risk and you come up with algorithms and formulas and processes to deal with risk, but the unknown is the winter season. It's about changing very quickly in the face of these things as they emerge.
Thank you, Doc. Second last question. Jubilee Maposa says, emotional about the future. How do we make sure such information from webinars or lectures like this does not remain merely academic and moot?
I mean, that's the easy one. Join talks and conversations like this with Wits alumni. Exactly. But jokes aside, in all seriousness, how do we make information webinars like this? I suspect, and Lorata, I'm sure you can answer this post this call. The link will be available. And so please feel free to rewatch it, send this across to everyone, not for me, but to really hopefully help share this message around things that I've shared in the conversation today. The other piece that I would say is within the spectrum around knowledge and speakers, there's 2 sides, and these are polar opposites. Now, please, I'm not saying right or wrong. On the one side, you've got the pure, and we know this as a Witsies. You've got professors who are brilliant, and they're very good at what they do, but they're dry as 2-month-old bread. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got entertainers who come and they proclaim to be thought leaders. It's whiz bang, it's videos, it's emotions, but there's no substance around that. Right? my thing and my challenge is find speakers that bring both. They bring the credentials and the methodology around academia, but also bring something that you are emotional about the future. Right? So that may not answer your question on how to do it. But what I would say is think about these things when you do engage around finding people who can bring some kind of different thought to your processes, to your businesses.
And the last question from Gele. Thank you for the discussion. I'm curious to know from Dr. Wing, what, if anything, stays consistent across the different seasons, and how then, considering how Amazon has built their strategy around what stays true over time, what are a few things that he sees has stayed the same over time in general?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, look, the obvious one, it's a very trite one, is change. So change is the obvious constant. So that's the obvious piece. The other piece that I would say is the thing around history doesn't necessarily repeat, it rhymes. So when you have a look at certain things, we can say things like unfortunately. So let's have a look at the negative one. In the history of mankind, there's been the authoritarian rule, i.e., single rule, than there's been a democracy. Democracy as a concept in the lifespan of the human being is actually relatively short. So unfortunately, I think you will find these kinds of things over time around democracy and authoritarianism. But you'll also find that perhaps the biggest constant, the thing that's going to not change around all these things, even though in the face of AI, is we're still human beings. We still want to connect. And I think that was the kind of point I wanted to bring, and I want to anchor home around spring, around that humanist. What's never going to change across all those seasons is you're still going to be dealing with human beings. So what does it mean from a practical implementation point of view as a leader? What it means is if you're going to be dealing with people, you have to have the ability to, one, convey information, but two, more importantly, convey it in a way that's a story that hits the emotions. That's never going to change. What are some other things that are never going to change? We're always going to need food, shelter. There's the hierarchy of needs. Those things are never going to change. There's always going to be human behavior. I don't suspect those things are going to change at any given time. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Wing. Really appreciate you making the time out for us again. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lerato Mtambanengwe. I am the Alumni Relations Officer here at Africa's #1 university. I just want to give a special thanks to Dr. Wing for coming back. This is actually the second time you're joining us. You were with us in person a few weeks ago. I just want to quickly, while I have everyone here, just add the links to your book. Please go make a purchase so that you can always kind of look back at this conversation. It has been recorded, and we will be putting up on our YouTube page. That link will be shared. And also there's a quiz that you can do, and that was the QR code that Dr. Wing was sharing. So as we conclude, thank you once again, Dr. Craig, for sharing your thought-provoking insights from your four future seasons framework. And again, I said this is the second time. The first time was very successful. Everyone wanted to see you again, and we thought it would be great to have you kind of have everyone access you from our global alumni network. Tonight's webinar has provided another valuable opportunity to engage with ideas that underpin your work as a futurist, helping us better understand uncertainty, recognize emerging signals of change, and prepare ourselves for a range of possible futures. So thank you for challenging us to think differently about the future and for equipping us with practical ways to navigate it with greater confidence and foresight. A special thanks also to Dr. Keegan, who unfortunately had to leave us early, who always is on call for us. She's always so gracious with her time. So thank you to her for doing the opening for us this afternoon. And to our alumni and guests, thank you for your participation, your questions, and your continued commitment to lifelong learning. The strength of our community as Witties it lies in curiosity, willingness to engage with new ideas, and our desire to shape a better future. So this discussion reminds us that while we cannot predict exactly what lies ahead, we can prepare, adapt, and position ourselves to thrive in times of change. And that is perhaps one of the most powerful message of the 4 future seasons. So on behalf of Alumni Relations, thank you all so much. Look out for our email with the YouTube link, and we hope to see you at our next event. Have a lovely evening. Stay warm if you are on this side of the world, and take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. And from my side, again, thank you so much, Lorato and Wits alumni. Again, there's the QR code that Lorato mentioned before, and there's a copy of the book. I spoke about Project Spark around the rhinos. There's also very cool stories in there, obviously Game of Thrones. We also speak about Sherlock Holmes. We talk about the link between 2 horses' asses, believe it or not, and spaceships. We speak about all kinds of different things. I chat about things like small and Nyama skeletons. We speak about the keyboard and how that translates. And so it's packed full of ideas, but also there's an application chapter at the end around how to apply this framework for both yourself and your different industries. But again, from my side, Lorato, thank you for the opportunity to contribute back to the community, back to the alumni. And again, this entire journey starts, and it has started, and it would not have begun if it wasn't for Wits, and I'm eternally grateful for that. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Wing, and thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day further.